So I have 45 minutes in which to talk to you today, and I'm going to spend 38 minutes of that time depressing you completely with some talk of, and some readings and images about human slavery, the Holocaust, war, COVID, and Trump. And then about 7 or 8 minutes attempting to bring you out of that deep tunnel of despair into which I have driven you. What this means is if you leave early, you will, I suppose, get what you deserve, but if you stay for the whole thing, you get not only the good news at the end, and what I hope will be a vigorous question and answer session, but there will also be wine, or so I'm told. There's going to be wine somewhere, I know that. I'm dividing this into 4 parts. The first is about 2 books, 2 history books about slavery. What these historians will tell you, and Adam Hochschild, by the way, is married to one of our country's leading sociologists, is that you can get ideas, crazy ideas, into your head, the craziest of ideas. And to say that in Vienna is really to say something. And then you can unget them. There's probably a long German word for how to unget an idea, how to unthink something. And if there is, I would like to know it. So maybe we can make this even more interactive, from the start. Next, I will talk about crazy ideas that a whole lot of people have in our country today. I don't know how many people have them, but maybe it's about 77,303,568. But who's counting? Crazy ideas about elections, vaccines, race relations, immigration, justice, the economy, foreign policy, government. Ideas so very crazy that they've become sadly central to the way we live now, and probably the way we're going to spend the rest of our lives. I've told you this first part's depressing. Third, I'll talk about the work of 2 guys, 2 fellows who studied ideas. Ludwig Fleck, who had another job besides being a writer, and Karl Mannheim, one from Lemberg, Lvov, Lviv, the other from Budapest, both brilliant, both writing their formidable works in the 1920s, 1930s, and then during and just after the war, both Jewish, and both undersung, even though they have unbelievable influence today, real and latent, for helping us to understand this world that we live in. They pioneered a new social science that they developed, watching then, as we watch today, the rise and then the spread of fascism. The Sociology of Knowledge. That's the only long German word I really know. And fourth and finally, I'm going to speak about our role at universities and other knowledge institutions today in the face of some of these challenges that we are looking at. In my view, you cannot really be a mainstream educational institution without interrogating in your activity and in your curriculum, throughout your curriculum, how it is that people formulate ideas, how it is that so many people can grow so deranged all at once. And a big part of the answer to that question for me as a lapsed Sovietologist, maybe collapsed Sovietologist, as a publisher, as a media producer, and as an intellectual historian who's been exploring systems of thought control, one part of one answer, anyway, is that other people put these ideas into our heads. We as educators are supposed to do that, planting ideas in people's heads, but these maleficent actors are like diseducators, miseducators, maleducators. If we look at these horrible things without flinching, the world that we live in today, we will better understand that ideas in men's minds don't get there by themselves, and that we in this room, at this institution, at my home institution, at other places, have some of the power to change these ideas by what we do, what we are trained to do, what we are paid to do. And I'll conclude with a bit of a meditation on that point about our own power, about the power of knowledge institutions, a power that together I'm calling the Fifth Estate. I'd like to thank Dr. Volker Menze and everyone at CEU for this great honor today. The entire talk, though, will be self-serving. I work at MIT. I'm now a fellow at the IWM here at Misha Glenny's invitation. And when I'm not writing books, and by the way, that one has, this is cool, has passages about Chlebnikov in it. When I'm not writing books and articles about this stuff, I am raising money. I raise money for the part of MIT that puts all of our knowledge online for free, all 2,500 courses, videos, syllabi, problem sets, experiments, performances, recitals, you name it. I'm good at raising money. That's why they let me out of Cambridge every once in a while. By the end of this talk, in fact, I suspect you might not be realizing it yet, but you will be giving all of your money to MIT Open Learning. Even if you have very little of it, it's okay. You'll all walk out of here with lighter wallets, but I hope somehow, somewhat intellectually enriched. And again, there will be wine, I'm told, so let's start. Imagine this. As Adam Hochschild writes in his history of emancipation, at the end of the 18th century, well over 3/4 of all the people alive were in bondage of one kind or another. Not the captivity of striped prison uniforms, but in bondage in various systems of slavery or serfdom. 80,000 chained, shackled Africans were loaded onto slave ships and transported from Africa to the New World every year. 11 million slaves were loaded onto boats for what they called the Middle Passage. Just over 9.6 million survived the journey. It's actually what built and also what almost destroyed my country, and what may destroy it still. This is a detail from the Harpum book from the island of Jamaica. I'm quoting, "Slaves who committed minor offenses would have half of one foot chopped off with an axe. Slaves who refused to work were tied up and whipped with lance wood switches, and then salt and pepper were rubbed into their wounds. Slaves who committed minor offenses, slaves who attempted to escape from their masters had heavy iron rings fastened to their neck and ankles, or a spur placed in their mouth. Those who rebelled were nailed to the ground, with each limb attached to a crooked stick, and then burned gradually from their hands and feet to their head." Now, who among us here today could actually consider this normal? And if there is somebody out there, just keep your hand out. Hochschild asks us to imagine a huge armada spread out in time as well as space, because during more than 3.5 centuries of this steady trade in humans, there were 35,000 Atlantic slave voyages. "We must picture a world," he writes, "in which the vast majority of people are prisoners. Most of them have known no other way of life. They are not free to live or go where they want. They plant, cultivate, and harvest most of the earth's major crops. They earn no money from their labor. Their work often lasts 12 or 14 hours a day. Many are subject to cruel whippings or other punishments if they do not work hard enough. They die young. They are not chained or bound most of the time, but they are in bondage, part of a global economy based on forced labor. Such a world, of course, would be unthinkable today. It's a good word, unthinkable. This is a typical slave ship. Those are people. Over 1 million people died at sea, packed in this way. But this was the world, our world, and to most of the people then, in fact, it was unthinkable that it could ever be otherwise. Well over 3/4 of all the people alive were in bondage. And then it changed. Our ideas changed, almost overnight. What is even more astonishing than the pervasiveness of slavery in the 1700s is how swiftly it died. By the end of the following century, slavery was, at least on paper, outlawed almost everywhere. The anti-slavery movement had achieved its goal in little more than one lifetime, really in just about 50 years in the UK, one of the most ambitious and brilliantly organized citizens' movements of all time. The abolitionists succeeded because they mastered one challenge that still faces anyone who cares about social and economic justice. They put better ideas into people's heads than the ones that were there originally. They started by drawing connections between the near and the distant. We have long lived in a world where everyday objects embody labor in another corner of the earth. Often we don't know where the thing we use comes from or the working conditions of those who made that thing. This historian tells us that the abolitionists' first job was to make Britons understand what lay behind the sugar they ate, the tobacco they smoked, and the coffee they drank. They were asked to unthink what they had thought, and soon hundreds of thousands of Britons were refusing to eat slave-grown sugar. Never doubt, as Margaret Mead has said, that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. This book, the Harpham volume, I just like playing with this thing. This book is the story of how we got out of that mindset. The Hochschild book is the story of how we got out of that mindset. The new book here by John Samuel Harpham is the story of how we got into it. It's brand new. It's just out. I just read it here in Vienna. How we were able, as Americans, ultimately to treat this thing as the most normal thing in the world. How did we even begin to conceptualize that normality? These are two beautifully written and explosive books, both intellectual histories of slavery, histories of ideas, two people looking decades after the fact into, in effect, the sociology of knowledge. Second, what are the crazy ideas we have today? Well, we have had at home, anyway, tens of millions of people believing the American government actually was illegitimate. We had 20 million, maybe 30 million people believing that armed insurrection against the previous government was warranted. We saw them in action at our national capital, at our state capitals. And we had more than 1 million Americans die because many of them were fed wrong information and believed it about vaccines and COVID. And that doesn't really begin to touch on the really wacko stuff that people believe. There's a tremendous amount of disinformation out there. The World Economic Forum has ranked it the #1 threat to society. Here, I get to do this again. Emerging as the most severe global risk anticipated over the next 2 years. Misinformation and disinformation. Ahead of war, poverty, and climate change. And this current administration came into power, or back into power, the one that we're living under at home, although I may shred my passport, stay here in Vienna. I think that's a good backup plan. This administration came into power with a plan. They had a plan, and they told us about it. The plan was in Project 2025. This is a 960-page briefing book for what they were going to do from the Heritage Foundation. And it's like my favorite cartoon. This is a billboard for a wolf, and the sheep are looking up admiringly. He tells it like it is. I'm going to eat you. They told us, with a particular focus on dismantling honest and open media. I get to use this again. It's somewhere here. Media agencies. We're going to take down all of the foreign broadcast stuff that we do. We're going to take down the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And in fact, Trump has surrounded himself with what they call these days tech bros. This is the inauguration. It actually just happened this year. It's kind of amazing to me that it's been a long few months. But they're really screen bros. These are guys at the inauguration. Look at the platforms and control they have over what goes into our heads. That's Musk there. You know these guys. Anyway, they came in hot to attack media in particular. To attack universities like mine that also spread knowledge. Here's 60 of them under investigation, U.S. Department of Education website. Like in the old days over here. And don't think you're immune or out of reach, by the way. They're after everyone in the knowledge business. Third, that brings me to these guys and their ideas. Ludwig Fleck was a microbiologist, serologist, philosopher, epistemologist. That was the hardest line that I had prepared for today, but I got it out. He's a star. He's a genius. Recruited immediately to work on typhus at the main public hospital. But he's writing papers for publication in Lemberg at the time with names like these. I'm annoyed because 1927 should be in parentheses as well as the other ones. But anyway, there it is, that list of some of them. In 1939, Lvov is captured by Germans, and Fleck is moved to the ghetto. And he's analyzing the urine of the sick, dying in droves in the ghetto hospital, and he's trying to save them. I'm compressing his story further. He injects the working serum that he develops into himself and into as many Jews as possible to save them from typhus. The Nazis notice some of this and take him away to Buchenwald and then eventually to Auschwitz, not to murder or punish him, but as we say now, as a new hire. Nazi soldiers are dying on the Eastern Front, thousands of them every day. And at Auschwitz, there are laboratories where all of the monstrous experiments we know more about are being conducted with syphilis and other things, but where there is also a project to develop typhus vaccines to save the SS. In the camp, Fleck becomes a privileged prisoner, which is to say, they keep him barely alive. And he develops a working typhus vaccine, experimenting with the guts and lungs of everything that he can find, rabbits, mice, and the occasional guinea pig. But he lies about it. He hides the vaccine that he creates, even though he is under, to put it mildly, surveillance. And at the same time, he develops a fake vaccine. And then, and here's the kicker, with a poker face and working out of a death camp where life is as fragile as the wick of a candle. He gets some 30,000 SS men injected with the fake vaccine while directing the working formula, some 6 liters of it only, into the bodies of his fellow camp inmates to save him. He goes on to testify about this at Nuremberg and also in oral histories produced for Yad Vashem, where he is buried today among the righteous on Mount Herzl. Now this is courage. Can you imagine, there's a knock on the door of your barrack laboratory and they're expecting you to present them with a vaccine that's going to be rushed up to the Eastern Front, and you hand the fellow who's standing there looking rather unpleasant a fake serum. Fleck is thinking, even as a young man, about how vaccines are developed, how scientists and then whole societies go about changing and improving their thinking. He becomes a philosopher, a sociologist even of knowledge, working off the epistemological studies of Polish sociologist Florian Znaniecki in the 1920s. Fleck comes up with, in the 1930s, as the skies over here are darkening, the idea of a thought collective, the Denkkollektiv, as he puts it in German. Thomas Kuhn, who writes The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and the sociologist Robert K. Merton helped to popularize it. In fact, this is Kuhn's copy of Fleck's book from the MIT libraries, where Kuhn's archives are kept. But Fleck's 1935 book was originally published only in an edition of 600 copies, of which only about 200 were sold. Sometimes I think I'm working with the same publisher. The book begins with this line: "What is a fact?" That's how the book starts. That's the first sentence. And what does he say about it? Thoughts, he says, are actually collective phenomena, often not visible to the members of the closed communities where they take place. A new idea, a new thought, can never be traced back to a particular individual. It arises rather from collective cooperation whose medium is communication of thought. A collective also working across space and time. The thought collective is a community of persons mutually exchanging ideas or maintaining intellectual interaction. It also provides the special carrier for the historical development of any field of thought, as well as for the given stock of knowledge and level of culture. Fleck defines the thought collective. He says, knowledge cannot be considered cut off from the people who create and possess it. All activities devoted to attaining and preserving knowledge are bound to social interactions among persons. Reality, then, can be understood as a network of chains of thought joined together in facts. You're not born a Trump voter, hating black people, white people, Jews, Catholics, Mexicans, Muslims, the red-headed, the left-handed. You come to these ideas and patterns of behavior by hearing them, reading about them, seeing them, and watching them in action. And if you were to place small children together in the American South, say, in Natchez, Mississippi in 1860, or 1960, or 2025 for that matter, some white, some black, some boys, some girls, they would play with each other just as energetically and freely as if you had assembled children of the same color and gender. The stigmata of race, the false hierarchies of gender, the cruelties of adults are visited upon all of us only later. In the socializing institutions of school, church, the family, the media, especially the media, but especially the media, that we control so very irresponsibly today. This was the point of the historian Daniel Goldhagen's book, who explained how people were socialized relentlessly during the years of the Third Reich into Nazism by the media mechanisms and all of the educational, cultural, and social institutions under state control, relentlessly, relentlessly, relentlessly. Institutions were pumping false ideas, the hallucinatory ideology, he called it, in Goldhagen's memorable phrase, underlying the Nazi genocide, propagating a, quote, fantastical, quote, demonological, quote, apocalyptic, quote, psychopathic system, so evocative and so relevant today. An insane, again his words, ontology, cosmology, worldview, moral culture, propagating all of that relentlessly into all 65 million residents of the Third Reich. Mannheim is coming up in the 1930s too, in the 1920s and 1930s, as these hallucinatory, maniacal ideas began taking hold across much of Europe. He noticed, as one might notice here now, how frustration, intolerance, hatred, violence were rapidly on the rise. He wrote that the wild ways of thinking he was observing, modes of thought, he called them, could not be adequately understood as long as their social origins were obscured. It is one of the anomalies of our time, Mannheim wrote in the classic book we know now as Ideology and Utopia, that those methods of thought, by means of which we arrive at our most crucial decisions, and through which we seek to diagnose and guide our political and social destiny, have remained unrecognized and therefore inaccessible to intellectual control and self-criticism. This anomaly becomes all the more monstrous, he emphasized, and this was 1929, when we call to mind that in modern times, much more depends on the correct thinking through of a situation than was the case in earlier societies. How right he was. The book actually opens with this line. This book, I'm quoting, is concerned with the problem of how men actually think. Philosophers have, apologies to any philosophers in the room, philosophers have too long concerned themselves with their own thinking. The aim of these studies, he wrote, is to investigate not how thinking appears in textbooks on logic, but how it really functions in public life and in politics as an instrument of collective action. And he tells it like it is. In his wartime book, written in English, called Diagnosis of Our Time, he adopts an approach that echoes Fleck. It begins this way. Let us take the attitude of a doctor who tries to give a scientific diagnosis of the illness from which we all suffer. There is no doubt that our society has been taken ill. What is the disease, and what could be its cure? That's his opening. The cure he wrote about is what he called militant democracy. And you'll have to read Mannheim or some other books, like the one I'm trying to finish, to find out more. Fourth and finally, what lessons might exist from this interrogation, an interrogation ever so brief of history and sociology? What calls to action might become clearer for cultural and educational institutions, universities, museums, libraries, galleries, archives, but also for society as a whole? This is the number one problem. Nathan Robinson is brilliant, and he has the best subtitle that you could conceivably create. This is the number one problem. A new and radically aggressive approach is needed to the way we engage in idea dissemination. We need a new kind of emancipation, manumission of ideas to keep everything we do out of a kind of neoliberal arrangement where it all finds a way to being a commercial good. A piece, if I can echo the opening of this talk, a piece of property. So there are three things. We need more moving image and sound media coming from the academy, like what we do back home. This is MIT OpenCourseWare. It's the largest .edu presence on YouTube. There are now, this is from this morning, 6 million subscribers who get an alert every time we post a new video, and that's just growing. Most any student who walks into your classroom today is coming into that room from out of an audiovisual kind of smorgasbord into what is almost a mausoleum of chalk and print and text. So it's good for teaching too, to create more and more audiovisual material, the knowledge we have in these walls and other walls, and getting it out there. Also letting students watch and review it again and again. Second, we need to contribute in a massive way to Wikipedia. We can talk about that, I hope, in the discussion. And third, we need to change the licensing and kind of property regimes that we contract materials around for idea dissemination. We need to keep these monsters from controlling what we know. We need to recognize that there is a role, even an obligation, that all of these universities like mine, like yours, all of these think tanks, all of these libraries and museums and publishers and public broadcasters have to play now in a world where the truth is paywalled but the lies are free. Man is born free, as someone once said, but everywhere he is in chains. And much the same can be said about ideas, stories, and the sounds and images that we need to take us out of the chaos, the epistemic chaos we seem to find ourselves in today. Fleck was an immunologist, and it's something like immunization that we need. We all need to become brave doctors now, brave in some sense, brave as he was. So thank you very much, and here is the final slide where I reiterate the wine situation, hopefully. But I would love to have a, welcome a discussion. Thank you.